Season 3 is coming out in about 9 days from now. I think they're pretty much done with tuning. Might see some few hotfixes, but I think they're done with tuning for the most part. So I decided to make the final version of my M+ tier list. Now this is going to be a bit of a longer video. I'm not going to cut it up as much as my normal videos, and I'm just going to talk. Now I made this tier list on stream. I spent a lot of time doing it. I went through a lot of logs, a lot of vods. I have ranked every spec based on a lot of different factors, including damage, utility, survivability, synergy, etc. I am defining this list as for the M+ meta, which is for the highest keys in the world possible. But this also has relevance in lower keys because a lot of the damage and utility carries down to lower keys. And also getting invites is a lot easier if you're playing the meta specs that are being played in the top keys. But in lower keys, obviously, you could maybe move some specs up or down. Now, one interesting thing to think about is that Priest, Druid, and Mage have been on virtually every meta comp on several different specs for the last 3 or 4 or even 5 years. So I have given those classes extra consideration. And I will talk a bit about my terminology. I think the specs that are on S tier are the best individual specs. I think they are the best specs in the game. Maybe you wouldn't make a comp entirely out of them though, so I think specs that are in A+ tier are specs that definitely have potential, and then specs that are in A tier are definitely viable for top keys. Specs below A tier, I think, have some caveats, but are still probably potentially playable. Now to start the tier, I will put Assassination Rogue at the top of S tier. Now this is a spec that was bad at the start of PTR, got buffed every week, and I think the latest week was just the tipping point. This spec is doing the most AoE. It's doing very high prio, competitive with Arcane in a lot of situations. Yeah, I think it's simply just the highest damage spec. Of course, it does have caveats. I think Rogue is a reasonably low utility class. I think its single target, like its raw single target with no mobs around, is actually kind of bad. So I do think Assassination Rogue has caveats, but I feel like it is like just truly the top damage spec right now. I think then is Unholy DK. Now, Unholy DK is a spec that was getting buffed and nerfed and buffed and nerfed a lot. People kind of fell out of favor, weren't really playing it. Frost was very OP for the last few weeks. They ended up nerfing Frost, and everyone kind of just swapped back to Unholy. And it turns out Unholy is still very good. I think Unholy's damage is a 45-second, minute 30 profile. It's doing strong AoE, strong single target. Prio isn't that amazing. It's not bad, but it's kind of middling. I think the damage is well-rounded, all around well-rounded. But I also think the DK utility is something that is overlooked. I think, so first of all, grip is kind of memed, but I think it's actually really good. You can even consider it to be a damage buff. Like, you have things like sharpshooters and priority, grip those in. Grip can enable certain pulls, like in Floodgate, which is in this season. There is the Demolitionist pull that is kind of hard to do without grip. And grip is a shorter cooldown now. There's no A-bomb, but grip being a shorter cooldown is very nice. And then the other part of DK utility is this extraneous tankiness, where you pretty much cannot die as a DK. You need very little external healing. You have very high EHP, will pretty much never get one shot, will never really die to a damage event as long as you're paying attention. And you don't even need healing after it because you can just death strike back up. So I think the power of taking out one player that you need to heal is very strong for ensuring group success. So as long as DK is doing the damage, which I think it is definitely doing the damage, I really think DK is a spec that can be up there. And then I also think Frost is still up there. It did get nerfed. I feel like Frost and Unholy are pretty much the same spec from everything I've seen. They both have 45-second, minute 30 profiles. They both do reasonably the same amount of prio single target AoE. There are differences between the specs. It could be like a dungeon specific thing. It could even be a player specific thing, but I seriously think both DK specs are pretty much the same spec right now. I want to say Unholy is a little bit stronger. And also Unholy is playing Riders, which is very nice. You get to horse around. And in the last spot in S tier, I'm just going to put Arcane Mage. Now, Arcane Mage, I think its funnel is a bit worse than on live. You're not playing Spellslinger anymore, and they did nerf Resonance by a little bit. So it was a little bit worse than on live, I think, but it's still pretty good. I think that the AoE is looking not even bad. Like the overalls, Arcane is only losing by like 1 to 2 mil, and it's still doing the best prio in the game, and it's a mage spec, and you need lust. So I think Arcane is definitely still up there. I also think Frost is kind of up there. If prio isn't that important, Frost is up there. It's doing more damage. I don't think it's in S though. I would put it in A+. But I think Frost Mage is doing a lot of damage, and it's a mage spec, so it gets the point from being a mage spec. I have heard things that Frost slows and roots are actually like kind of problematic when you're like trying to pull packs, etc. But I don't know if it matters that much. I think like maybe you're going to be swapping between Arcane and Frost depending on the dungeon. I do think Mage is looking good though, and when Mage is looking good, it's in. So I don't know. Next, I'm going to go Shadow. Our Shadow Priest is doing good damage. It does good single target prio AoE. It's not doing top damage. I would say against like actual proper overall specs, it does lose a little bit, but it does have a good damage profile. And I think most important thing is it's a priest. And now we're looking at a season where Disc Priest is not the guaranteed healer. Disc Priest is looking strong, but it's not the guaranteed healer. So there is a lot of merit in having a Shadow Priest for the priest utility. And I did say earlier, Priest has been brought in every season since Shadowlands Season 3. That was 4 years ago. I think it's really likely that a Priest makes a lot of sense to have. And Priest kind of is weird with utility, because you kind of think that Priest is bad utility, but I think Mind Soothe and Fort and PI are just like so different that that's just like so much stronger than what other classes can do sometimes. I do think there is like caveats to Shadow Priest, so it feels like kind of useless sometimes. Like if you need to stop mobs, you're like an NPC. And I do think like if you're actually going to be ending up running Rogue plus DK, your controller is kind of bad. And it's maybe a consideration that Shadow Priest just is just too much of a liability. I also feel like it's a bit defensively weak. It's not that weak, but it's just a little bit. The build they play now is like an Archon build where you extend Void Form to like a minute 30, so it's kind of Arcane based. Next spec I'm going to have is Havoc. Now Havoc is not a high overall spec. It's a funnel spec. It was looking good for season 2, and then VDH came. I think this season 3 is going to be less of a VDH Omni meta. I think VDH is still looking strong, but I think VDH is going to be less present. Havoc funnel is very good. I definitely think Havoc funnel is better than Arcane, at least in some scenarios. It's probably situational, but I definitely think Havoc funnel is quite good. How important funnel is if Assassination Rogue exists, I don't know. And Havoc overall is a bit behind. Obviously, it does bring Chaos Brand, though, which would pretty much put it at the same overall as other classes. I think Havoc is like a solid class that has issues fitting in, is how I would describe it. I don't know if there's going to be a avenue for Havoc to fit in, but I think if there is an avenue for Havoc to fit in, I think it is very good. And then on the last on my list, I will have Ele Shaman. Ele Shaman was like good, and then it got nerfed, and then it got buffed again. I think the overall damage from Ele Shaman is looking good. I really do think it's capable of doing high damage. It does single target as well. It is inconsistent. I think its inconsistency is a big issue. Like sometimes you do tank damage in a pool, but it's not even that. I think the bigger issue lies within the fact that you have something like the Binding Javelins on Ecodome, the new dungeon, and you need to kill these mobs in a specific amount of time, and you can't kill them because you have no damage. I feel like there is a level of inconsistency. Sorry, I feel like there's a level of inconsistency that Ellie might have. But you can kind of control it, and you can play around it. And then I think Sky Fury is a very good, especially if like these classes at the top are truly up there. Sky Fury is a very good buff. You do need Lust. And I guess you could say Poison Cleansing Totem is also good for Arakara. Only Arakara though. So I think Ellie is definitely up there. Now, Enhancement Shaman. I think Enhance is worse than Ellie in a general, broad sense. I think there are advantages and disadvantages of Enhance versus Ellie. I think Enhance is burst. I mean, I guess enhances bursting as much as Ele on a shorter cooldown. Enhance is more consistent. Like, you can actually kind of hold damage when you want it as enhance. And enhance can burst really high with the way its tier set works. But its tier set is kind of bad to use. It's kind of hard to use. You have to like stop damage at the end of a pull. Kind of have to go AFK a lot, and it's kind of annoying. And then also Enhance is a big PI scaler. Enhance looking to be the best PI along with Dev, getting 6% from PI, maybe a bit too much. Kind of hard to play Enhance without PI. So I don't really know exactly where I want to put Enhance. Like, I feel like in a lot of situations, Enhance is weak. If you're in a group without PI, you kind of actually are lower overall than other classes. But when you have PI, you're kind of like matching other classes, and of course you have like a good buff, etc., good lust, good utility. So I don't want to be coming across as a sandbagging or something. I do not think Enhance is up NA plus. But I also don't think Enhance is that bad in B. Enhance is definitely bad in Raid though. Might get a buff there. Alright, and next I will take Boomy. Now, Boomy is a controversial spec. Boomy is a spec that I think is in a certain spot that people think is really bad, but it's not actually that bad. There have been numerous nerfs to Boomy since it was one-shotting mobs in dungeons, and Boomy in Raid is looking terrible. And all of the Boomies are kind of dooming. But if you look at actual overalls and logs of keys that Boomies have done, Boomy looks to be like within like 1 to 2 mil overall of the top specs. And of course, Boomy seems to be like incredibly strong utility based. Mark of the Wild obviously very strong, and Beam is very strong. Maybe not so relevant because Resto Druid is so prevalent, but if Resto Druid was not so prevalent, then I think Boomy is actually legitimately still good. Boomy is also quite likely to get a buff, so I do think that's a consideration. I'm going to put Boomy at near the top of A tier. I think it's like there. It's actually really not as bad as people say. I have Feral Druid. Now, Feral Druid, I also think is doing damage, and it's obviously Mark of the Wild as well. You kind of need to play it in a physical comp. If you watch my Mystic Touch video, you saw I had a slide where it shows Feral loses 13% of its damage when it's not in a full physical comp. Which is really a lot, so you can only really play it in that comp. But in that comp, it definitely is doing damage. It's like high AoE, bursting like 50 mil even. It's just doing good damage in every profile. Nothing like too crazy. It's not doing like super high single target or anything. But to do high damage as a Druid spec is pretty good. So I think Feral is like definitely looking to be like a mainstay in a physical comp. Devastation Evoker. I'm going to put Devastation Evoker here. I think Dev is a very high overall spec. It's like you can do very good damage as Dev, and it's not even like it's padding. Like, you do good prior damage while you're doing AoE. You do good single target in the M+ build. It's not really like it's padding. It's just the issue with Dev is it does too much damage too quickly, and it's kind of bad for the other classes in the group. If there's other classes in the group that gain more damage from having more ads up, even just like more resources or anything, Dev is kind of just like stealing damage away from them. So it's kind of for that reason Dev is like never really meta, even when it does high damage. Like in season 2 it did really high damage and it wasn't actually good. It felt kind of bad to play with one. So I feel like it's like a damage profiling issue for Dev. But I do think Dev damage is quite good, and the utility that it brings is pretty reasonable and lust. Of course, it has no buffs, which is not a good thing. Alright, and then other high overall specs, I think Destrolock. I do think Destrolock is a spec that is quite high overall as well. Obviously, very good damage on big pulls. Very good damage on big pulls. Pretty much the Destrolock standard. High overall, big damage on big pulls. Doing decent prior single target. Nothing too crazy there. Obviously, Warlock utility is a bit like not that crazy, but Imp Dispel is pretty good in this season. I think Destruction is a spec that if it was on a different class would be like incredibly strong, but because it's on Warlock, I'm gonna put it in A. And likewise, I think I have Affliction as well. Now, Affliction is also a bit of a funnel spec. I think Affliction does do a good amount of like funnel prio damage, while also doing good AoE at the same time. I think it's I think the only issues with app is it's kind of encumbered by its cooldowns and its setup, and it can't really use curses, which I think curses are actually a very underrated part of Warlock utility. But I think AF is definitely like doing good damage on like prio, single target, and AoE. So I think AF is up there. Now Demo is also kind of up there, and I think like in the current state, I would put Demo here. I think it's the worst of the Warlock specs, but I think Demo is also doing good like AoE, single target, prio. I think Demo is doing those things as well. But Demo is simming very high in raid, and I'm surprised they haven't nerfed it yet. But I seriously do think you're gonna see at least like a 3% taken off Demo or something. And I think like I don't think Warlock's very useful, and I think if it's the worst Warlock spec, I don't really think it's gonna see much play. I'm just gonna put Demo in B, but I do think in its current state you could just put it in A with the other Warlock specs. Now I'm going to go for Rogue. I think Sub Rogue. Now Sub Rogue is a spec that is doing a lot of damage. I do think it does a lot of damage. It's definitely almost comparable to Astar, I would say, but I feel like it has like caveats. It's like a burst spec, a very high burst spec, kind of limited by minute 30 cooldowns. If you can't use those cooldowns perfectly, you're not really doing like anything spectacular. Like on a boss, the last 3 minutes, sub single target is like it's not bad. But it's like not crazy. But on a boss that lasts 330, sub single target is like really good, for example. And then just like looking at logs, I'd look at logs and I'd go through pools and I'd find something that sub is just not doing damage to. Like I think I was looking at Floodgate, there was like a pool where this sub was like not doing damage to Architects, for example. Just because like the way the cooldown timings work out, the sub just does not have damage for every pool, really. Or damage for every mob in every pool. So I think there are definitely some caveats to playing sub. And I think there's less caveats to playing Asa. But I think there is strength, and it could also just be a dungeon-specific thing. I actually think sub could maybe be better than Asa in some dungeons or something. But I think the caveats make me put it in A. And also it's a rogue spec, which isn't overly useful. And then Outlaw, I think, is also kind of doing the damage, but it also has caveats. Outlaw kind of needs to be played in a Fizz comp, or else it loses too much damage. Needs the pools to kind of be tailored around it, or else it doesn't really work. I think it's also a little bit RNG as well. I think Outlaw has the damage, but I don't think Outlaw is like gonna be meta or anything. But it's definitely good in a Fizz comp, and I definitely think Fizz comps are like quite viable. I will go and look at Hunters now. Now I'm putting all 3 Hunter specs immediately on A tier. They were very OP at the start of PTR. They've been continuously nerfed. Now, there is talk about MM not actually being that good and like simming less than BM or something on AoE. I think sims are kind of not the full data. I think the way I would say it is I think BM is looking to be like the more single target pro option that can do sustained AoE. Whereas MM is doing burst with strong cooldowns, but less prio single target. I don't think MM prio single target is necessarily bad, by the way. I think people kind of make it out like MM is like an NPC on single target. I don't really agree. I think MM on single target is actually still fine. It's just nothing spectacular. And then BM actually can do pretty decent single target. And then survival, I actually think survival is also good. But it's probably, I don't know, it's kind of just like a mix of the other 2 specs. Like you have like AoE, single target, prio. I think all the Hunter specs seem pretty close. I think if you were playing Hunter, you would actually just play your preferred spec probably. But I think BM is probably the most favored. And of course, it's a Hunter. Like Hunter's the most useless class in the game. But I think they're doing enough damage to be placed in A. And then I'm going to put Fire Mage in A as well. Now, Fire got nerfed this week. It was looking really good. It got nerfed this week. It was a massive nerf, like 10%. But no one has played... I swear I have not found any, like, VODs or logs of anyone playing Fire since the nerf. I don't know if it's that bad. I seriously think Fire Mage is the spec that, like, always crawls back. Not every time, but it usually crawls back. So I'm just going to put Fire at the bottom of A. I think maybe the damage isn't there. There is the downside that they're kind of playing a Flame Strike build, which isn't that good. But I think the damage is maybe not quite there. But it is a mage spec. That will be my A tier. I do think the ordering of this A tier is like so subjective. Like it's very like I think like I put Druids at the top and Shaman at the top because they have a buff. But I feel like the ordering is so subjective. I think it's kind of fair to put like Warlocks and Hunters in the back half. Maybe Subs doing like a lot of damage. I don't know. In B tier. So in B tier, Demo's kind of fake B tier for now, but what I actually will put in B tier is Ret. Ret is a spec that is... I just think it's not very useful, like, in terms of, like, the way it does damage. Its damage isn't particularly strong. I think there's, like, a rumor that Ret is, like, popping off and, like, doing insane overall. I don't think it is. I think it's doing capable overall, but I don't think it's doing anything crazy. I think its overalls are still lower than the biggest AoE classes, and then Ret single target prio is just, like, not really there. So I don't think Ret is just doing enough damage with a good enough damage profile to be more than B. Utility for Ret, I guess you could say it's good, but it doesn't have a damage buff, and I don't think the utility is like proven to be good before. So I don't really think the utility is a point, and also I don't think it's that tanky. Like DK is way more tanky. I will be putting Fury Warrior in B as well. Now Fury Warrior is actually not that bad. It's doing pretty reasonable damage. They're playing Mountain Thane now, and Mountain Thane is less capped. It's still kind of capped, but it's less hard capped than it was before. And I think Fury Warrior is good if Battle Shout is relevant. I think if Battle Shout is relevant, you could just play Fury Warrior and it's fine. But if Battle Shout is not really relevant in a group, you're kind of just playing a lower overall class, and it's not really doing like crazy damage to anything. It's just doing like pretty like mid to decent damage at everything. Arms Warrior I think is worse than Fury. From what I've seen, Arms Warrior looks to be like worse on pure single target like Prio, etc. Maybe a bit better on big AoE pools, but Arms is still not that good on big AoE pools from what I've seen. Apparently it's squishier as well. I would put like Arms just below Fury, but I feel like because it's strictly worse, I feel like it's just goes a tier below Fury into C. Windwalker is then the last spec in B. This spec has been up and down and up and down. It's been like bugged to be good, bugged to be bad, and they keep buffing it and nerfing it. It's lately, like literally like yesterday as I was making the tier list, it got a bug fix to Shadow Pan, and now there are Windwalkers playing Shadow Pan and they're actually doing damage. Before I think it wasn't really doing damage. I actually would have put it on C, but there are actually Windwalkers doing damage now with their Shadow Pan bug fix, and it actually kind of looks promising. I don't think Windwalker is bad, but I also don't think it's going to be good. I think Brewmaster is very good for Mystic Touch, so I don't really expect you to be wanting to play a Windwalker. But I think Windwalker is capable. I think it is capable with the latest bug fix. And then in D, the worst spec seems to be Augmentation Evoker. Now, I didn't think Aug was looking that bad. I thought Aug was looking okay. Like in the proper comp, it would probably be okay for most of PTR. But this week they hit it with a tier set nerf. Now their Scale Commander tier set, the Command Squadron, was doing quite a decent amount of damage. Like there were pools where an Aug would top DPS on details. It was like a strong AoE burst. Although AoE burst isn't really what you want an Aug to do. But then this week they took that tier set and they nerfed it by 30%. And Aug was already struggling with damage, and they took it and they nerfed it down again. And that's pretty much what they did in season 2. They like Aug was kind of struggling with damage. They kind of gutted it just a week before the season, and Aug was kind of trash for that season. And I feel like this is kind of what they're doing again. They're kind of gutting it just before the season, which is fine. I don't really want to play with an Aug. But I also don't think the other hero tree is like particularly good. I have not seen or heard good things about the other hero tree. So I think Aug is out for another season, which I'm not too dismayed about. Of course, the Aug utility is still there, but maybe the buffing tanks and healers thing was more important than I initially thought, because it doesn't really seem like Aug has any capability to be oppressive. And there's also no like OP DPS. I think like even like the strongest DPS that I have as Assassination Rogue is still only barely beating out the other top specs. So I don't really think there's the things present that Aug needs to thrive. Now to go into tanks, VDH got barely any changes. Like it has all its CC on the same cooldown. It's still looking pretty tanky. The damage isn't really there. There are better damage tanks. I guess VDH does a good prio or something. I don't really think it matters that much though. But it's just everything else VDH does is just still there. I think I'm just putting VDH on S still. I foresee the stops being very important. But then I also think there's Prop Pally. And Prop Pally is also a lower damage tank. But it is a tank that is doing a lot of interrupts and CC. And I think it seems like it lives as well. I don't think it has like survivability issues. They added the new meld pot, so you don't need to play meld as a tank. So tanks that can't meld are actually playable now, unlike in Season 2. And I actually do like playing with a Prop Pally. I've done high keys with both, and it actually feels nice not having to worry about interrupts. And there are some pulls that Prop Pally can enable. And I don't know if the stops from VDH are necessarily better than interrupts, and also the externals from Prop Pally are nice. So I think there is a lot to think about there. But I wouldn't be surprised as well if VDH just turned out to be the winner. But I also think tank balance is pretty good, because Brewmaster is doing a lot of damage. It's doing a lot of single target damage. Can even do like 3 mil single target, beating some DPS. So I think Brewmaster is very high up there. Even though it has low utility, it's also living. I think most tanks are living pretty well. I do think it's kind of looking like this, where you have your 2 tanks that are doing the most control but lower damage, and then 2 tanks that are doing less control but higher damage. And Prot Warrior sounds pretty good, because you have a lot of good attack power scaling specs. So I think there is a lot of merit in Prot Warrior. It also has AoE silence, so Prot Warrior kind of does have control. And then I think I'm just going to put Blood DK and Guardian Druid down in B. I don't think they're terrible, like unplayably terrible, but they just don't really do anything. I just think if you have a tank, it's not doing the highest damage and it's not doing anything useful, why play it? Like, tank's a pretty selective role. You kind of need to have the best tank, or you're not really playing. And then to talk about healers, Resto Druid is looking like the clear winner for healers right now. Now, allegedly, there is a bug with the Resto Druid tier set. It causes 6 symbiotic blooms, I think, to spawn when you cast Regrowth instead of 2, because of some talent, which is maybe an unintended interaction. And they might fix that. And I did some calculations. I think it looks like it's about 10 to 20% of their healing, but it could be more, it could be less. I don't really know, coming from this bug. So they are doing the most healing right now. It's unclear whether it will stay. But yeah, I mean, Resto Druid healing is kind of crazy. Definitely very strong, can heal a lot. Resto Druid is also a Druid spec, and I don't think the other Druid specs are particularly good. Boomy is like kind of a bit behind right now. I was saying it wasn't really that behind, but it is a bit behind. And then Feral is only really playable in certain comps. And Guardian's not that good. So I think Resto Druid is looking to be the winner for healers. Mostly because of its strength and healing, and then that buff. Its raw damage output is a bit lower than other healers, but it doesn't really matter because you're bringing a buff. And then I think the other 2 healers in the meta are looking to be Disc Priest and Resto Shaman. Now, Disc Priest, Oracle did get nerfed a bit. The shield got reduced, and mana cost got increased. I have heard stories about Oracle Disc Priest going So I think Oracle is not a guaranteed like staying in thing. Like the shields are worse as well, so it's definitely not guaranteed that Oracle Disc is staying in. Now Void Eater on the other hand, Void Eater, the damage got buffed. Void Eater damage is actually quite good. I have also been healed by Void Eater Priest, and it seems like pretty reasonable. Like it's not like their healing is bad. They definitely can heal. So I think Disc Priest is looking good. There's also a Priest, and I said before, Priest is a pretty powerful class. So I really do think it's looking like a it's looking like a Resto Druid meta, but Disc Priest is like on the corner. And then I also have Resto Shaman in the corner. Now, people are playing Farseer now, and Farseer actually kind of does damage. It does quite good damage. Sky Fury is a pretty relevant buff. A lot of melee classes looking good right now. Fizz comp also looking to exist. I definitely think Resto Shaman is up there again. And I swear it's like this tri-healer core. Like the 3 healers doing the most healing, bringing a buff, and doing the most damage. There is one other healer that's doing the most damage. It's Preservoker. Preservoker, I think, does the most raw damage out of any healer. But I think it just has, like... I think Preservoker healing is just hard. It's like, too hard. It's too bursty and specific. Whereas I think dungeons these days kind of demand, like... kind of like a ramp... like a ramp type of healing where your health is just, like, permanently getting topped. Preservoker is kind of just, like, bursting your health up. Not really like spam healing people. It can spam healing. Sorry, let me start again. It can spam heal people, but it's kind of thought intensive. I don't really know how to phrase it. I'm sorry, but it is doing some good things. Like Temporal Anomaly got buffed to a shield that does about 7% of someone's health. So every time you use Temporal Anomaly, everyone just gets a shield. It's like a mini mass barrier, like very mini. And you do have 2 charges of time dilation. So I think Prez actually has the relevance. I just don't think it's going to compete with these healers that are playing good classes that have buffs. And then the other 3 healers I think I'm putting in B tier. I think Holy Priest used to have issues with like AoE healing. You actually like couldn't really heal that well. I think the tier sets seem pretty good for Holy Priest. I think Holy Priest is doing a bit better on healing than it was before. And it is a pre-spec, so I do think like say like Disc was actually trash, the Holy would actually maybe rise a bit. But I don't think Holy is good, and I don't think it's doing anything special damage wise or healing wise. And I think it's the same with H and Mischief. I just think these 2 specs, like no one's really playing them. But from the limited info that I saw, doing nothing special damage wise, doing nothing special healing wise, and not really having a special buff. I think Mystic Touch is pretty much sorted. I think Brewmaster is so strong. So I think that is the tier list. I do think, like, I have these things in order, but I think a lot of the ordering might change. And then it's also, like, kind of comp dependent. I don't really know if, like, this S tier comp is the best comp, but I think it's somewhat agreeable that these specs are, like, very high candidates for meta. And these specs in A, like, could potentially be there, or could be played with no loss, pretty much. I think specs in B are kind of a little bit worse, and then I think specs in C and D, like, you're probably not going to see any play on those specs. Now, in terms of meta comp, I think you are looking at VDH, Resto Druid, Assassination Rogue, Unholy, Arcane right now. But I think the issue with that, like one issue you could say with that is that there's too much funnel DPS in that, and the funnel target dies too fast, like with Assa plus Arcane. So maybe you want to play Frost Mage instead in this. Now I can also see that this comp is not the highest raw damage. Like I do think like a tank that does damage will do higher raw damage. So you could have like a Prot Warrior, Resto Shaman with this comp. And then like maybe you could even have a Havoc DH in instead of a Mage because it's doing funnel and getting buffed. So maybe things like that are things to be considered. Like Shadow Priest is also a consideration. Like, are you really going to drop the Priest? But then if you play Shadow Priest with Assa and Unholy, then you need a Lust. Maybe you drop the Assa or the Unholy for a Lust, or maybe you just run a Resto Shaman. I also think Prot Power seems like it pairs quite well with Shadow Priest. Maybe there's a full caster comp. Maybe these melees are bait, and maybe you just play a full caster comp. You have a Resto Druid, Shadow Priest, a Mage, and maybe like an Ele or a Warlock. And then I think there is a Fizz comp. I think Fizz comp is honestly just the same as last season. But I also think BM Hunter is pretty good, so you could probably play BM Hunter instead of Outlaw. I don't even know if Warrior is that good and like worthy of being in the Fizz comp. I don't know. And then there is a scary reality in which Boomy gets buffed because it's terrible in raid, and then Boomy becomes good, so you play Boomy with Arcane and Unholy, and then you drop the rest of Druid, put in a Priest. Yeah. But yeah, this is where I'm going to leave my tier list at. I think there are still some uncertainties. Definitely very hard to predict the meta from this point, because there's definitely still going to be some changes. If you remember last season, Unholy got buffed the day before the raid came out, I think, and it was a pretty substantial buff to the tier set. And then classes that were being ranked high, like Sub was being ranked high for Season 2, that class got nerfed and was never seen again. And then you have something like Arcane Mage, they got 12% worth of buffs after prog ended up being the best spec in the game, pretty much. So I think it's very hard to predict what's going to happen from now. But I must say, I do think Boomy and Enhance are probably next in line for a buff. I think Warlocks are next in line for a nerf. Maybe DK is going to get nerfed again as well. I don't know if Resto Druid is going to get bug fixed or not, but apparently there's a bug, and if that gets fixed, maybe that's going to change things as well. I'm not going to make a tier list for Raid because there's too much unknown about Raid unless you're an Echo or Liquid. But I will say I think like Boomy and Enhance look pretty bad in Raid, and then like Warlocks are looking pretty good, maybe Shadow Priest as well. But I'm happy about the way that tuning is looking for M+. It feels like, again, they're actually tuning around M+ this season and last season. And I hope it remains that way, and we don't really see the rise of like some unformidable meta like happened last season. And even last season was alright. Like there were definitely playable comps beyond the best. Thank you for watching, and I did stream this whole tier list. It took me 5 hours to make. I looked at a lot of logs and VODs. So if you want to see any of that part of the process, then check my Twitch VOD of the stream.